All right. How's everybody doing this afternoon? Wow. Thank you. It's an honor to be introduced by Kurt Anderson. He's the host of my favorite NPR show, Studio 360. And the three people that laughed at that joke, that was just for you. Okay, so why don't we just get started? So the year was 2015. The date, April 1st at 10:23 UTC. StackOverflow.com enabled an April Fool's prank called Stack Egg. It was a simple Tamagotchi-like game that appeared in the upper right-hand corner of the website. And although it had been tested, we didn't account for the additional network activity it would generate. Well, about 3 hours later, the company load balancers were overloaded, making the site unusable. All of the company's web properties were affected. The prank had essentially created an denial of service attack against ourselves. 3 minutes later, engineers involved went to a control panel and calmly disabled the feature. Half an hour later, the site was entirely back to normal. In the next hour, the problem was diagnosed, fixed, new code was written and pushed into production. The prank was saved. Was Stack Overflow lucky that the engineers had designed the prank so that it could be easily disabled? No, it wasn't luck. It was all in the playbook for operational excellence in April Fool's pranks. Yay! Thunderous applause. So we're going to be talking about the kind of April Fool's pranks that companies put up on their websites. Who am I? I've noticed almost all USENIX talks have two things in common. One is the slide that tries to establish credibility of the speaker, which is pointless for me because I have no credibility. But I want to try to convince you that I have some credibility here in that 10 years ago, this week, I published a book, or co-edited a book, April Fool's Day RFCs. Peter Salas and I took all the IETF April Fool's RFCs, put them in a book. It's something we'd always wanted to do. We included a lot of commentary. You're probably thinking, why would you sell a book that has information you can download for free? Well, A, we wanted to add some commentary, which, if a joke needs to be explained, it's not funny. So this is the least funny book ever published. But also, we wanted a coffee table book. We wanted something that, you could just, leave on your coffee table and your geeky friends might happen to see it and they could flip through it and have a laugh. Has the project been successful? Oh, I'll let you be the judge. Here is my actual royalty check from last year. You know you're working with a big publisher when your royalty checks are handwritten. So, the other thing that USENIX talks always seem to have some kind of overview slide. So I'm going to talk about something and then not that thing. And then the meat of the talk is really this top 5 list. And then I end with this other thing, which has 3 parts. And right now you're at the introduction. How are we doing so far? Okay, good. So I want to talk about something before we get into the technical details. What makes an April Fool's prank funny? And I believe it comes down to 2 things. First, the pranks have to be topical and absurdist. Now, topical means, pertaining to current affairs, right? You wouldn't do an April Fool's prank now about, a Madonna song from the 80s, right? And also they should be absurdist. Absurdist is not being silly for silly's sake. Absurdism acts as a crucible that burns away all lies to reveal an underlying truth. And the third thing is it should have surprise. Has to have an element of surprise. So let's apply this with a little case study, the mustache story. This takes place around 2010. I can't remember the exact year. Back when I was working in Google, my 7 years there were just one big blur. And so imagine a bunch of managers in a conference call brainstorming to come up with a good April Fool's prank that they could play inside the company. This was internal IT managers brainstorming. Now, there is nothing less funny than managers in a committee trying to write a joke, right? So after no success, they call me into the process. At the time, I was half a manager, so I guess they assumed I'd be half funny. And so I pull in and I say, okay, tell me what you have so far. And they list off their ideas, and they were awful. Why were they awful? Because they were not topical, absurdist, and obviously, they didn't have the benefit of attending this talk, which is their fault. Okay, so I thought to myself, what's topical? What's in the news? Well, face recognition was becoming cheap enough that it was becoming commonplace, and there were a lot of articles about the ethics of face recognition and stuff. So I blurred out, hey, didn't we just buy a company that does face recognition? You think we would be able to accurately place a mustache on the face of everyone in the corporate directory, right? And that's basically what we did. Okay. And big success because it was topical and absurdist, right? Now, my next case study happened last year, 2017. Stack Overflow realized that two-factor authentication was becoming very widespread. I mean, some of us have been doing it since the 90s, but it was becoming a consumer thing. And people were seeing it for their first time. So Stack Overflow released this video on April Fool's Day. I'm going to just play the first minute and talk about risky things. Let's see if this audio works.
At Stack Overflow, we help a monthly audience of 40 million developers get answers to their questions, find jobs, and solve problems. But that success, in turn, has made us a target. Attacks on our security spurred us into action. We had to adapt. We had to get better. We're excited to present the latest evolution in computer security. Dance Dance Authentication.
Awesome. So, big success, got a lot of press, made us very happy. Okay, now we've talked about something, I want to talk about the opposite of something. What makes an April Fool's prank not funny? You want to be very careful. You don't want to hurt people, you don't want to punch down, and you don't want to do an inside joke. So, for example, hurting people, you don't want to cause real harm. Google's Gmail drop the mic prank, major disaster. It literally blocked email from the person that you were dropping the mic on. A funeral director had a very unhappy customer who could not communicate to the, I won't, Google it, you'll find it. Punching down. Punching down is a comedy term. It means making fun of the downtrodden or the less powerful. Punching up means making fun of your CEO, people with power. I believe that racist, homophobic, and sexist jokes are inherently punched down, which is, from a theoretical basis, why they're not funny. There's a lot of other reasons also. But sure, mock people in power, I love that, as long as your CEO has a really good sense of humor, of course. And lastly, inside jokes. Every once in a while you see a corporate April Fool's prank that's external, but it only makes sense if you know that Larry in accounting loves World of Warcraft. Your customer base isn't going to know these things. Okay, now to the top 5 list. This is the technical meat of the thing, and we're running a little long, so I'm going to focus. I can either focus on the technical stuff or the jokes. Okay, good. So, feature flags. Feature flags. How many people here use feature flags? Good, I could go a lot faster. So you want to do your development of this feature behind a flag so that the code, even of the half-written feature, is in production. This lets you, enable the feature flag, in test, but not in production. Then on the day of, when you want to enable the prank, you just flip a flag. I have seen companies try to push a new feature into production by doing a code push. And it's like, okay, so we have to do the code push exactly at 9 a.m. because the press conference starts at exactly 9 a.m. And this is really not a formula for success. You also get into the problem, how do you disable the feature? Is that a code push where you roll back, which has problems, especially if you've done a database schema change? Or do you do a code push where you roll forward without that code, which, maybe you've introduced a bug? So feature flags, so much better. Next item, Load testing. Load testing. We all load test, right? No, lower your hands. Load testing is the flossing of IT, right? We say we floss. We tell everyone we floss. We tell the dentist we floss. We floss like the 2 days before any dental appointment. How many people here floss 7 out of 7 days? Liars. But you do have a nice smile, I have to say. Okay, so the reason most companies don't do load testing is that they scale organically, right? You get another 10,000 users a week. You don't really need to do a lot of load testing because you can kind of scale just ahead of your organic growth. And that works great if you're a little startup, but it doesn't work well if you're a big company. Like, for example, Facebook, when they launched Facebook Messenger, they already had millions and millions of users. So when they enabled Facebook Messenger, they were instantly going to have probably 20 million users all of a sudden. And they had no way of load testing for that situation. And this was really a high-risk situation. They had a big press conference and everything when the feature was turned on. So they couldn't just flip the feature flag. What they did was what they call a dark launch. They deployed the feature 6 months earlier. It was in your browser, but it wasn't displaying. And the JavaScript code in your browser was sending test messages. And that let them test the scalability of the system. And at first, just 1% of users were sending these automated test messages. And they had a knob where they could turn it up and up and up and solve the scaling problems as they turned up the knob, so that on the day of the press conference, they knew that it was going to scale, and it was a very successful launch. Lots of companies do this kind of thing. Before Google enabled IPv6, you had JavaScript in your browser for weeks that was doing a bunch of tests to make sure that when they turn on IPv6, it wouldn't freak out. Some bad examples or negative examples, the stack egg story that I opened with, boy, it would have been nice if we had done a dark launch with that. But we couldn't. Why? Because the code was written it didn't get finished being written until like hours before we launched. The Apple live stream, when they announced the Apple Watch, the number one thing I remember about the Apple Watch was that I couldn't watch the live stream because their website crapped out. They had this new real-time text thing going, and it hadn't been launched. They could have put that JavaScript in the browser for millions of, probably billions of users ahead of time, but they didn't. I do notice that if you Google for Google's drop the mic problem and Apple's Apple Watch launch problem, Apple's SEO is really excellent. It's hard to find articles about that outage. Good job, Apple. The one thing I could find is where I blogged about it. Okay, and search sucks on my site, so that took me a while. Okay, number 4, you want to involve all the silos. Everyone needs to be involved. Even if I know you want to keep it a secret until you launch it, but you got to tell marketing and PR and sales. Customer support needs to know because they're going to get customer calls and they need to have a playbook for how to respond. The salespeople need to know. Maybe so that they can plan to play it cool and just be like, "Don't you have a mustache? I thought you had a mustache." But you need some kind of plan. And lastly, you have to perform a project retrospective. Or postmortem. Different people spelled postmortem differently. Some call it a learning review, or with a hyphen, or without a hyphen, or one word. Whatever you call it, do a postmortem, whether it was a success or if there were problems. Because either way, you probably learned something. At Stack Overflow, when we do a postmortem, we always write it up and then we send it out to the entire company, because we believe that what we learned, it should be something that all of engineering should learn. And well, actually, so the first time I sent out a postmortem to the whole company, someone hit reply all and said, "I don't know about anyone else, but I really like getting these postmortem reports. Not only is it nice to know what happened, but it's really great to see how you guys handled it in the moment and how you plan to prevent these events going forward. Really neato. Thanks for the great work." I'm so proud to work at a company where the culture is, after an outage, instead of like getting email that's like, hey, you jerk, can you keep this website up? You get an email that says, really neato, thanks for the great work. Whew. Well, I'm kind of tired. Where are we now? Okay, we're at the last part. I promised I'd get this done by 5:25, so I think we're going to do it. And I mentioned that the last part has 3 parts. So the last part is we're going to talk about the lazy way to do April Fool's pranks. These are the most lazy techniques I could think of. Number 1, lazy technique number 1, use someone else's resources. So for example, the Dance Dance authentication video from earlier, that was a blog post and a YouTube video. No matter how viral that video goes, we're not going to overload YouTube. And if we do, we really don't care. Lazy technique number 2, creatively describe something that already exists, right? So how many people are familiar with my company, StackOverflow.com? 1, 2, 3. Okay, some of you, excellent. When you ask a question on Stack Overflow, there's a little checkbox, and let me highlight it. There's a checkbox, I'm going to answer my own question. And which gives you a slightly different user experience. Well, you're all familiar with rubber ducky debugging, right? The concept that if you explain your problem to another person, formulating your thoughts often helps you figure out the problem yourself. So much so that often you can debug a problem by just explaining to a rubber ducky. You don't need to talk to an actual human. So a great practical joke that Stack Overflow could do is when you check that button, maybe display a rubber ducky. You'll have to wait till Sunday to see it. It's a lot better than my slides, but you have to keep it a secret. Right. Okay, so the next prank, along the lines of explaining something that already exists, the next prank is something that I really think the Go people should do. How many people use the Go programming language? Okay, a lot of people. Excellent. Every time a new person learns Go, they join the Go mailing list and start posting like, oh, I want generics, and I want closures, and I want all these things. Go is a minimalistic language. It doesn't have those things on purpose. So the prank that the Go team could do is they could announce Go 3.0. It has all those things that everyone's always asking for. If you think less is more, imagine how great more would be. And then at the end of the announcement, say, in fact, we've already implemented all of this. Click on this link to download it. And when you click on the link, you get this page. Now, see, that got a lot of applause, but I know the Go team won't do that. I know the Go team won't do that. And I'll tell you why. I've known Rob Pike since 1995. In those 23 years, he has never laughed at a joke I've made. The man is on a first-name basis with Penn and Teller. He has a very high bar. But it's free if Google wants to use it. Okay. And lastly, lazy technique number 3, you could simply mislead your audience. For example, you could write an SREcon talk that is about things you should always do when launching any new feature, summarizing the information in, say, this fine book, but at the last minute, change the title of the talk to Operational Excellence in April Fool's Pranks. That would be hilarious. Thank you very much. That's my time. Fool you very much.